Hello and welcome back to Middle Age Gaming. Today we are once again doing a review in 3 acts, where we don't just play the game and give you our take at the end. No, we'll be giving our impressions at the 2, 10, and 30 hour mark, or after we beat the game, whichever comes first. That way you can have a review in real time. Today we'll be covering Doll's Nest, which I've heard a lot of great things about and am really looking forward to sinking my teeth into. But before we begin, may I just remind you that if you enjoy our content, please like and subscribe because it really helps our channel out. And with that out of the way, I am about to begin Doll's Nest. So, see you in about 2 hours. Alright, so I've played my first 2 hours and so far so good, with only a few minor gripes. So first, the good. Really enjoying the gameplay. I am not very far in, but already I can see a lot of weapon options, which is great. I haven't found too many frame or doll parts, but I'm assuming those will come later. And as expected, the gameplay is very reminiscent of older Armored Cores. Now, I did play on mouse and keyboard, but I think I'll be trying out the controller here in a bit because one thing I noticed was turn speed does seem to be a thing. So what will happen is if you're making smaller movements with the mouse, everything is fine. But when you try to go too far to the left or to the right, it's going to dampen your speed. So that can be a bit jarring as you're looking side to side. But strangely, this does not apply to looking up and down. So you can look up and down as quickly as you want. Now, it does take some getting used to overall, but you know what? Turn speed and all that, that's actually part of the Armored Core experience that I was looking for. So I'm actually pretty happy with it. But I do think that playing with a controller is going to make this feel a little bit more intuitive. So I think I will be switching over to that. Another thing that I noticed is that flight, and I say this in air quotes, is actually more akin to Armored Core 5 than anything else. It may just be the parts that I've unlocked so far, but it seems that you can jump and then use your boosters to drift to slow your descent, but there's no vertical lift. Now, hopefully this is a component thing, and later I'll be able to unlock more free flight, but we'll have to wait and see on that. I also haven't touched on the paint customization yet, but I have glanced at it, and so far it looks pretty robust, but I will confirm that in my next update. And I also like the fact that you can tune your doll. So there are a variety of stats that you can put points into, and then you can freely redistribute them as you like, which is great. And currently I have them all in BP, which is your overall ammo reserve. Because the way weapons work here is that they don't have a set number of ammunition. They do in a magazine, but not in reserve. Instead, you have a BP pool, and when a weapon needs to be reloaded, it draws from that pool. And this is shared between all weapons, and different weapons have different costs per bullet or rocket or whatever when you reload them. On the other hand, melee weapons, or at least the ones that I have access to, do not pull from this, as one might expect. You can't freely slash away, however. They do have energy drain, similar to Armored Core, but they also have a cooldown, which means you can't just hack away at an enemy once you get up close. Instead, it seems to be more well suited as a finisher when an enemy's low on life. You zoom in, slash them, and they go down. I will say though, the targeting of the melee weapons does feel a bit wonky. It is kind of short, and there have been some times where I've been pressed right up against the enemy and still somehow managed to miss. So far it seems that you'll be getting a lot more bang for your buck if you're using the guns over the blades. And that actually brings me to a problem that I've been having towards the end of my first 2 hours. Doll's Nest uses the classic Armored Core targeting system where you have a field of vision, and if enemies are within that field of vision and in range, you're going to lock on. And similar to Armored Core, this can take a little bit of time, so firing away as soon as the enemy pings on your screen may result in reduced accuracy. Now, so far that hasn't been a huge deal, but in the second level, I have come across one specific enemy type that just kind of slowly drifts through the air. And thing is, for the life of me, my weapons do not seem to hit them. Even with a full lock-on and this guy moving very slowly, they don't seem to predict the trajectory. So I'll fire where they are, and then they'll slowly drift out of the way of my shots during the travel time. And this is also true of homing missiles, which just seem to fly right on past and then loop around in a death spiral as they just can't seem to turn sharp enough to hit the guy. Now, I've noticed higher velocity weapons do slightly better, but they still seem to eat through my ammo as I'm just whiffing shots left and right. So anyways, this has been giving me a fair bit of trouble, but it may be less the game and more me just needing to adjust my build further. Maybe I need to experiment with even more weapons. I also may just end up taking those points that I put into BP out and then putting them into accuracy, so that might make a difference as well. It's also really just that one enemy type, so it may just be that they have some sort of mechanic that makes locking on them much more difficult. Now, other than that, the gameplay did actually surprise me a little. So there's the obvious Armored Core reference, but there's a bit of a Dark Souls in there too. Or perhaps I should say Stellar Blade. So like Dark Souls, the levels are built around progressing through unlocking shortcuts, rejuvenating your resources at a bonfire, which in this case is a glowing tree, and that will, refresh all your resources, but it will also respawn any enemies, and at that point you just continue on your merry way. Like Stellar Blade, however, death comes with little consequence. Death is neither a game over nor a setback. It just resets you to your last spawn point. But you actually maintain any resources that you found on your previous run. So this means there's actually little risk to constantly pushing forward. So even if you're out of healing items and ammo and you're down to your last health bar, you actually have more to gain by pressing forward and scouting ahead than by heading back to heal up. So far, so good. Although I do have one minor gripe. As of yet, there doesn't seem to be any background music. It's not a huge deal, but it does make the world feel a lot more empty. Now, that might be by design and actually be an intentional choice by the developers, and if it is, I get it. It's just not a choice that I personally would have made. But it's still early, we'll see how it goes, and I will see you in another 8 hours or so. So first things first, I wasn't entirely correct about what I said before about there being no penalty on death. It turns out that actually each part has a repair cost, and that cost is collected on death. So when you die, you're going to be repaired, but it's going to take the overall cost of your doll and deduct that from your overall funds. That said, I have not had any problem with money, even as I've unlocked more expensive gear, so I wouldn't really worry too much about that. Now, what I was having a problem with was my BP, or the resource that you use as your ammunition. So since this is shared between weapons, using less cost-effective weapons can drain your BP really quickly. So I've been using a more conservative build recently. And another way that I've found to combat this is actually through a certain utility module. So the parts that you can equip to your doll here, those are called modules. And the different kinds you can equip are mobility, headset, hanger, thruster, utility, 2 primary weapons, and 2 rear weapons. So mobility is your movement, jumping, carrying capacity, and it also kind of affects your flight. Now there is no flight here like in the original Armored Cores or Armored Core 6. It's more like Armored Core 5. You kind of jump and then you can kind of slowly glide down. But the stats for that are actually on your legs, not on your booster. And we do have various kinds of legs. We have your standard bipedal, we have your reverse joint, we have your quad legs. In the trailer, I saw tank legs, but I haven't unlocked any yet. And I've actually unlocked a different kind of leg that has wheels on the bottom. So those are almost like roller skates. So those are going to be your fastest and standard movement, but they don't really jump very high. So, give and take. Now next up is headset. Headset is your targeting. So that's going to affect, how far away you can lock onto something. But it's also going to be your field of vision for locking onto something, so how big is that space where you can lock onto something? Now, hanger is kind of like your core in a way. The doll is the actual core itself, but your hanger is where you're going to be equipping your rear weapons onto, and it's going to impact your rear weapon reload speed. So for example, if I have, a cannon or missiles on as my rear weapons, when I fire those, they have to recharge or, restock their ammo. And different hangers are going to have different speeds for that. So some are going to reload more quickly, but maybe they have less armor. Some are going to have more armor, but maybe reload a little more slowly or be heavier. So that's the hanger unit. Next, we have our thrusters, and our thrusters are similar to the boosters in Armored Core, but they are a little bit different. So what they do affect is your kind of ground speed when you're boosting, also your quick boost, which is kind of like your dodge and your energy drain for all that. They do have a minimal effect on your kind of glide time, but again, that's mostly on your legs, so this is kind of they assist with that, but they're not your primary, where you're primarily getting that from. And finally, that takes us to your utility module. And utility is actually really interesting because it adds a lot of extra functionality to your doll. You can have your flares, which are going to, help intercept homing missiles. There's a thing that's going to mess with enemy targeting, make it harder for them to lock onto you. There are assist drones that work kind of like your orbital weapons in Armored Core 3. There's a smoke screen, so you can get real sneaky and get in there and get behind them and hit them in their the weak points. Or in my case, there's a utility module that actually sacrifices some of your life for BP. So if you're running low on ammo, you can actually, you can take the physical hit, but then you're going to have more ammo back. So that's what I've been using. And on a related note, I've been streaming, and actually in the stream, I've had some really great tips in chat. One of them actually was that sometimes it's actually better to carry fewer weapons than more. And this is because your BP is shared across all weapons, except for melee, which, just uses your energy resource and has a cooldown. So basically, the idea is, as long as you have, something that covers, medium range or close range or long range, you don't actually need to double up on weapons there. So, for example, if I was playing another game like MechWarrior or Armored Core, I might want, kind of a large cannon on one shoulder, and I might want missiles on the other shoulder. And that's beneficial because each of them is going to come with their own ammo pool. But because all ammo is shared here, all your BP is shared across all your weapons, if I have a cannon and I have the missiles, they're pulling from that same pool. So really, I just need the one. Now, there are situations where you might want both. For example, like I said, there is some recharge time when they reload. So, you can fire one, and while that's reloading, you can fire the other one. Also, if you just, for example, if you really needed different functionality, like for instance, if I wanted something like a cannon and then I want something that's going to home in on enemies for rockets for whatever reason, you obviously can do that. But it is going to affect your repair cost, so you're going to be more expensive if you do die. So, and because of that, you really just need the one. You don't need both weapons. Also, on the subject of ammo conservation, in my last update, I talked about an enemy that just for whatever reason I could not lock on to. It turns out that it really is just that one enemy type. I haven't had a problem locking on with anything else. Everything else has been perfectly fine. Don't know what's going on there. So moving on to level design, it's a bit of a mixed bag. So rather than running sorties or missions like, you might do in an Armored Core or a MechWarrior or Earth Siege or something like that, rather than that, you're limited to 3 labyrinthian zones. Now, overall, the map layout for each of those is pretty good. There's a lot of good variety. They have, cramped corridors, and you'll have open spaces, and lots of verticality. You'll have layers upon layers. The idea is this whole facility that you're in, different levels are controlled by different countries, basically. So, you are moving up and down throughout. The issue, though, is that everything is either a shade of gray or a shade of brown. Occasionally, you'll find something that stands out, like maybe an old escalator or a series of catwalks that look like they belong in the Death Star, but mostly you're just going to be staring at cracked concrete and broken pipes. And I get it, that's part of the world design, it ties into the lore, but when you combine that with a lack of an OST, there's no music, it can feel very samey and quite often get very disorienting. So there's no quests or any goals to keep track of. Your real only objective is to push forward. And when you're doing that on a looping track, you're bound to run in a few circles. And there have been times where I've found a locked door and I have no idea how to get through it. So I just, say, screw it, I'll move on. And I find the key in a completely different part of the map and then have no idea how to get back to that door. All I'm saying here is, as hard as they were to read sometimes, a 3D map like the old Armored Cores would go a long way here. But on a lighter note, I have had the chance to play with a controller, and I will say I greatly prefer it over the mouse and keyboard. Now, take that with a grain of salt. You know, I typically play on console, so controller is kind of, you know, my home turf. But, you know, if you're somebody who prefers mouse and keyboard, you know, your mileage may vary. You might really enjoy that. But for me, personally, I found the controller to be so much easier to use. That said, I did need to tweak the first-person aiming significantly on the controller. So as it works, the game is mostly in third-person mode, but with sniper rifles, it will go into first-person. But the problem is the sensitivity on that was actually identical to being in third-person mode, so it was really hard to get a precise shot because it would just, you know, the camera would just fly to the left or the right. Now, what I ended up doing, I think the default was something like 30, and I had to turn the sensitivity down to like 3 or 5. Like, it was a massive difference to get it to feel comfortable, so keep that in mind. And on a final note, I did toy around with paint a bit. So overall, pretty solid, though, you know, the way you fiddle with colors can take some getting used to. It's not just, you know, RGB, it's RGB and then also saturation and then also, you know, light versus dark. And then there's also a hue slider, which I don't really understand because hue just shifts through RGB. So yeah, I don't really understand. You didn't need that slider at all. That didn't need to be there. But it is, and it, you know, so just don't touch it. It's fine. Unfortunately, there are no patterns that you can select from. So you can't do tiger stripes or camouflage or anything like that. There's also no stickers that you can add, you know, so it's just your basic paint. So each component has 4 paint slots. You have your primary slot, your secondary slot, your inner parts, which is going to be like all the gears and stuff and your joints. And then you also have a illumination slot, you know, for lights or anything like that. Now, on the doll herself, you do get far more options. You have the standard, you know, 4 or so that you have for her outfit, but you also have her skin tone, her eye color. You also have her hair color, and her hair gets highlights, so her hair actually has 2 tones. And then you can also get kind of that little glare or, you know, the shine on her hair. You can choose an extra color for that. So if you wanted to have, you know, blue hair with a pink shine to it, you could do that. You know, it actually does look pretty good. So I will say that while I would like to see more options, I would love to see if they could do in a patch or something and add some maybe textures to it. Or what I'd really love would be to see some sticker placement and stuff like that. That would be amazing. I would absolutely love it. But you know, it gets the job done. You might not be able to get the exact look you want, but you can get pretty close. All right, and with that, that's all for now. So I am going to go and continue playing, and I will see you guys in about another 20 hours or so. And I'm 30 plus hours in, and coincidentally, I just finished the game like an hour ago, so yay! I still have a couple of things to tidy up before New Game Plus, but otherwise I am done, or at least done with this iteration. There is still New Game Plus to look forward to. But before I kind of do a recap, I just want to say something because, you know, I am going to be using this term because I've gotten used to it by now. I've been calling the little girls dolls. They're actually not dolls. They're called nymphs. The kind of queen mother, she refers to them as her dolls sometimes, but they are in fact nymphs. So if you hear me use the word nymph, that's what I'm referring to. I'm referring to your little character or the other little girl characters that are running around. So also earlier I said that melee didn't really seem all that useful, but I was incredibly wrong there. I probably did the back half of this game with a dual melee build. Melee is incredibly powerful, and when you dual wield melee weapons, you can actually swap them out to negate the cooldown time. So actually melee is really useful in this game. Anyway, with that out of the way, let's recap by starting with the good. So first of all, I loved the build variety and the added bonus of tuning to really get the most out of your build. Specifically, I actually really did love the leg variety. So we have your standard biped, reverse joint, quad, and tank legs, But they also have roller legs, which are kind of like roller skates to get you to go a little bit faster. And they have these kind of rocket legs that they don't really jump as much as launch you straight up in the air. So those are actually going to give your highest vertical jump and are actually really good if you want to explore, because sometimes you can, hop onto ledges that you wouldn't be able to get to otherwise. The level layout is also really, really good, with lots of doubling back and unlocking shortcuts to give it that kind of Metroidvania feel. And while some early areas do feel very samey, later areas do have a little more variety of their own. So you can say like, okay, well, this is the water reservoir area, or this is kind of a deserty area, or this is a kind of a construction area or stuff like that. So it is good to see a little more variety later on in the game. And actually, boss fights are very unique. You're never going to be facing off against the same kind of boss twice. You're going to have a tank to face off against one time, and then you're going to have this big attack helicopter thing, and you're going to have a room where you have to fight these pillars, and you have this giant orb that kind of snipes you from afar. So it's really cool that they have so much variety among the bosses. It's not going to be the same thing over and over and over again. And that's great. I actually really appreciated that. And also, the lore is very weird here, and I am completely on board with it. Not a lot of it is presented up front. You can go to Nema, your queen mother, and you can ask her some questions, and she'll give you a little bit of background on different things. But if you really want to know what's going on here, you're going to have to go through the items and the gear and all that, and they all have their little descriptions. And it's actually not presented right up front. You do have to click a button that will basically give you more information on the item, and then that's where you're going to get most of your lore kind of stuff. So lots to go through. If you're a big lore nerd like myself, a lot of fun. Just expect that you're going to have to do quite a bit of digging. Okay, but with that out of the way, I guess it's time to move on to not the bad, but there are some things that I feel could have maybe been handled a little bit better. And take this section with a grain of salt, because outside the last point, these are subject to personal opinion. So first of all, the color palette is a bit bland, relying very heavily on gray, brown, and yellowish green. There's that extra variety at the end, but they do still heavily rely on those colors. And I get it. These are dystopian ruins. Everything's falling apart. But yeah, it would be nice to see like maybe some different colors, even if they're faded. Like let's see a yellow pipe and a blue pipe and a red pipe together. Or, maybe if there were like old billboards that are like torn up and stuff, but you can still see a little bit of color underneath there. Something like that I think would have really broken it up a little bit better, or at least made it a little more visually interesting. And while the level design is very good, it is also very labyrinthian. I mean, yeah, so some people are going to love that and love the exploration of it. For others, I do think some sort of map would have been really nice. I don't think it needs to be part of the UI. I do think you could have done like an Armored Core thing where it's in the menus, so if people don't want to access it, they don't ever have to see it. But there are some areas where, you're going to have a hub room. It's a circle. There's 6 doors, and they all kind of loop back into each other. So it's very, very easy to get turned around. And that brings us to quests, which can be a bit wonky. So for example, let's say that you found both a letter and a certain nymph, and then you find another nymph that initiates a quest. You can have a situation that's like this. I'm looking for a letter. And then she just sits there. So you have to return to the save spot, refresh the area, and then run back to her. And then she says, thanks for the letter. And that seems to be it. Unless you run back to the save spot, refresh the area, and then run back to her. Oh, well, I'm looking for my sister. Run back to the save spot, refresh, run back to her. Oh, you found her? I'll go to her now. Return to the save spot, refresh, and now she's moved to her sister's location. I really just feel like that could have been better streamlined where, I could have just been like, oh, I'm looking for a letter. Oh, you have it? Great. Well, I'm also looking for my sister. Oh, you know where she is? Let's move on. Like that would have been way better than me having to go back and refresh the area between each stage. And then also sometimes they will move. They'll say they want something, you give it to them, and they move, and they give you no indication of where they're going. So without a guide, you're just going to need to search the entire world over. And again, that's where a world map of some kind would have been super handy, especially when you're in that in-game cleanup phase. Also, a journal that keeps track of who's who would be great because, you know, they're going to be throwing a lot of names at you. And finally, on the technical side, there are a few glitches here and there. I previously spoke about that one enemy type that simply refused to be targeted correctly, but also towards the end, I was having this issue where I would be fighting an enemy and they would just disappear. And it's not a huge deal, but there was one part where I was fighting this kind of mini boss. And, you know, I thought maybe she jumped off a bridge and killed herself, but it really seemed that she was just in front of me and then suddenly wasn't. But the problem is she was supposed to drop some gear, and now I cannot get that gear because she offed herself, just up and disappeared. And because the way autosaves work, I can't go back. So the only way to get it now is to go through New Game Plus, find her again, and then hopefully get it there. So maybe that could have, I don't know, that's some kind of glitch. But anyway, with that out of the way, there is a lot of untapped potential here. So here's a few things that I would like to see in a sequel, or possibly even patch 10. So for one, I'd like to see a bit more utility for some of the weapons. For example, some of the melee weapons have a charge attack, but not all of them. The lance in particular here feels like a missed opportunity because in the description, it explicitly says it has thrusters that nymphs will use to launch themselves forward. So it feels like you're going to have this charged kind of, you know, lunge attack, but really it's just kind of this little poke and that's all you get. So, you know, that's missed opportunity there. I'd also love to see some more synergy between weapons. So for example, handguns can be dual wielded, but one-handed melee weapons can't. And I'm actually kind of curious how that would look if you could actually do that. And while we're here, there is a special kind of weapon called trebuchet. And the trebuchet weapons are actually not one kind of weapon. They're just basically means any weapon that you have to stop to fire. So this includes missiles, grenade launchers, miniguns, just a whole bunch of stuff. And I think it's paying homage to the original Armored Core, where you had certain weapons where bipeds and reverse joint would have to take a knee to fire. But then that was kind of offset with your heavier, you know, ACs with the tank legs or the quads. You know, they could use them on the fly or on the move. So I think it's supposed to pay homage to that, but literally everybody has to stop to use them. So it feels kind of off when my tank, you know, has to sit perfectly still in turret mode to use a minigun. Doesn't really work too well. Some of the trebuchet weapons do have extremely long range, so it does feel like they're supposed to be used for a sniper build, but only certain heads and a certain utility item are going to make use of that. And also, they seem to be extremely inaccurate and not do a lot of damage. So usually what'll happen is you'll just warn an enemy of your presence, they'll come running over to you, and by the time they're within range of your other weapons, they don't have any damage on them yet anyway. So yeah, I haven't really found a good utility for those weapons yet. So hopefully they could probably maybe tweak those a little bit and find, you know, a good case use for that. But really, given this was NitroPlus's first attempt at a non-visual novel game, I mean, wow, like this is nothing but amazing. I mean, yeah, I cannot stress how well this game really worked out. And I am really looking forward to seeing what they do with a sequel now that they've got some experience under their belt in this genre. So very excited about that. And need I remind you, it's only $20, so you're getting a phenomenal deal at that price. So yeah, definitely recommend Doll's Nest, especially to fans of either the PS1 and PS2 era Armored Cores or fans of Armored Core 5. So let us know in the comments, are you looking to pick up Doll's Nest? Have you already played it and have some opinions of your own you'd like to share? Let us know in the comments. Also, special thanks to Cardinal29 and Eternal Visitors. You guys have been a godsend helping me navigate this game. Like I said, it is a maze, and there are a lot of things that I would have very easily missed without you guys, so greatly appreciated. All right, and with that, thanks for watching. If you like our content, please like and subscribe. That is also greatly appreciated, and I hope to catch you again soon.